12-year-old Ziva lived in a small town with her father, Tsepo, and her stepmother, Nyafa. Life had never been easy for her. When she was just a baby, her mother passed away, leaving her in the care of her grieving father. For years, it was just the two of them. Tsepo did his best to raise her with love, even though the pain of losing his wife never fully left him. But everything changed when Tsepo remarried. At first, Ziva was hopeful that having a stepmother would bring warmth and care into their home. But Nyafa was not the kind and loving mother figure she had imagined. Instead, she saw Ziva as nothing more than a burden. While she smiled in front of others, her heart carried nothing but resentment for the little girl. No matter how hard Ziva tried to please her, it was never enough. Over time, the small home that once held love and laughter turned into a place of silent suffering. Ziva longed for the mother she never knew, for the warmth of a hug that never came, and for the father who was too weak to protect her. But deep inside, she held on to a tiny flicker of hope that one day things would change. She had no idea that her life was about to take a heartbreaking turn, one that would test her strength in ways she never imagined. Before the first light of dawn touched the sky, Ziva was already awake, rubbing the sleep from her tired eyes. The wooden floor beneath her thin mat was cold, but she had no time to rest. She quickly sat up and rushed to the kitchen before Nyafa could wake up and find an excuse to scold her. Her stepmother had made it clear. Ziva was nothing more than a servant in the house, and every mistake came with a price. She began her daily routine in silence, sweeping the floors, scrubbing the pots until her fingers ached, and carrying heavy buckets of water from the well. Her thin arms trembled under the weight, but she dared not stop. If she was too slow, Nyafa would accuse her of being lazy. If she accidentally dropped something, even by mistake, punishment would come swiftly. "You useless child! Can't you do anything right?" Nyafa would snap, her voice sharp like a knife. Sometimes her anger turned physical, a slap across the face, a painful yank of Ziva's arm, or a shove that sent her stumbling to the ground. While Ziva worked from morning until night, Nyafa's own children enjoyed a life of comfort. They slept late, played freely, and ate full meals, while Ziva remained in the background, invisible and forgotten. When mealtime came, she was only given leftovers, the cold and unwanted scraps from their plates. Many nights, she went to bed with her stomach aching from hunger, curled up on her thin mat like a lost, abandoned soul. Her father, Tsepo, had once been a strong and loving man, but illness had drained the life from him. He spent most of his days lying in bed, his skin pale, his body too weak to move. Ziva longed to run into his arms and tell him everything, how she was being treated, how lonely and afraid she felt. But every time she tried, he simply sighed, his tired eyes filled with sorrow. "Be patient, my child," he whispered. "Things will get better." But how long could she wait? Every day felt heavier than the last, and her heart grew heavier with it. At night, when the house was silent, Ziva lay awake, staring at the ceiling. From the other room, she could hear the soft laughter of Nyafa and her children, their lives untouched by suffering. Hot tears slipped down her cheeks, but she made no sound. No one would hear her. No one would care. But deep in her heart, a tiny flame of hope still flickered. She didn't know how, and she didn't know when, but she believed. One day, she would be free. The night the storm arrived, Ziva never expected her life to change forever. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the wind howled through the trees, like a warning of what was to come. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and distant thunder rumbled like an angry beast. Inside the small house, Ziva was rushing to finish her chores, her hands aching from scrubbing the cold, hard floor. But no matter how much she did, it was never enough for Nyafa. That night, an argument broke out. Ziva had accidentally spilled a cup of water while rushing to serve dinner. It was a small mistake, but to Nyafa, it was unforgivable. "You useless child!" she screamed, her face twisting with rage. Before Ziva could explain, Nyafa grabbed her arm and dragged her toward the door. "If you can't do anything right, then get out of my house," she hissed. Ziva's eyes widened with fear. "No, please. I'm sorry," she cried, struggling against Nyafa's grip. But Nyafa was stronger. With one hard shove, she pushed Ziva out into the raging storm and slammed the door shut behind her. The rain poured down instantly, soaking Ziva's thin dress within seconds. The wind whipped through her hair, chilling her to the bone. Shivering, she stumbled to the door and began pounding on it with all the strength she had left. "Please, Mama Niafa, let me in. It's cold," she begged, her voice breaking. But inside the house there was only silence. No footsteps, no response, nothing. Ziva pressed her ear against the door, hoping, praying that Niafa would have a change of heart. But her hopes shattered when she heard the sound of laughter from inside. Niafa and her children were sitting comfortably by the fire, warm and dry, while she stood outside, trembling and alone. Tears mixed with the raindrops on Ziva's face as she hugged herself, trying to stop her body from shaking. Her teeth chattered, and her bare feet were covered in mud. The storm raged on, the cold seeping deep into her bones, making her feel like she would never be warm again. She looked up at the sky, rain blurring her vision. "God, please help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roaring wind. She had never felt so abandoned, so unwanted, but somewhere deep inside her heart, a tiny spark of hope refused to die. With no other choice, she staggered toward the small broken shed at the corner of the yard. It was barely standing, with a leaky roof and holes in the walls, but it was the only shelter she had. Curling up on the damp ground, she wrapped her arms around herself and closed her eyes. The storm continued to rage, but she forced herself to believe that one day she would no longer have to suffer like this. One day, she would find a way to escape. Ziva huddled in the corner of the broken shed, her small body trembling violently from the cold. The storm raged on, its howling winds shaking the weak wooden walls, threatening to tear them apart. Water dripped steadily from the gaps in the roof, soaking the already damp ground beneath her. Her dress clung to her thin frame, heavy with rain, and her bare feet were covered in mud. She could barely feel her fingers as she wrapped her arms around her knees, trying to stop the endless shivers that ran through her. The darkness around her felt as heavy as the weight in her heart. No one was coming to save her. No warm hands would pull her inside, dry her off, or tuck her into bed. No gentle voice would tell her everything was going to be okay. She was alone, truly, painfully alone. With shaking hands, she slowly pressed her palms together, fingers interlocking as she closed her eyes. A deep, shaky breath escaped her lips as she whispered into the night. "God, please hear me." Her voice was barely louder than the rain, fragile like a dying flame. "I don't know why my life is like this. I don't know why I have to suffer so much." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to keep going. "Please, help me, protect me. I can't do this anymore." A lump of sorrow swelled inside her chest as she thought of her mother, the mother she had never known. If she had been alive, would things have been different? Would she have been loved, held, and cared for? Ziva squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could remember even a single thing about her. But there was nothing, just a cold emptiness, a life without a mother's warmth. A sudden clap of thunder roared through the sky, making her flinch. The shed shook as the wind howled, but she didn't stop praying. "I don't ask for riches," she continued, her voice breaking. "I don't even ask for an easy life. I only ask for kindness, for a home where I'm not treated like I don't belong." Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the rain on her face. For what felt like hours, she sat there, rocking back and forth, whispering the same words over and over. "Please, God, change my fate. Please, God, save me." The wind roared louder, the rain poured harder, but she refused to stop believing that someone, somewhere was listening. The night stretched on, long and merciless. Her body ached, her fingers numb, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. But deep in her heart, a small ember of hope refused to die. No matter how dark this night was, she told herself, the sun would rise again. And when it did, maybe, just maybe, her life would begin to change. The storm had not yet passed when Ayanda wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders and stepped onto the muddy path leading home. The streets were almost empty, the heavy rain forcing most people to stay indoors. But Ayanda had worked late, and now she had no choice but to walk through the storm. The wind was cold, and the raindrops hit her skin like tiny needles, but she pressed on, her footsteps splashing through puddles. As she passed by a small rundown house, something caught her eye. A tiny figure curled up under a broken shed. At first, She thought it was just a bundle of rags left out in the rain. But then she saw movement. A child, alone, shivering, frowning. Ayanda slowed her steps, her heart tightening. Who would leave a child outside in weather like this? She stepped closer, and when the dim light from a distant lantern flickered over the child's face, she gasped. The girl was soaked from head to toe, her thin dress clinging to her trembling body. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her knees, and her face was buried in them, as if trying to disappear from the world. "Little one," Ayanda called gently, kneeling beside her. "What are you doing out here in the rain?" The girl lifted her head slowly, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came at first. Ayanda could see the pain in her dark, frightened eyes, the kind of pain no child should ever have to endure. I have nowhere to go," the girl finally whispered. Her voice was so weak that Ayanda had to lean in to hear her. Ayanda's heart ached. "What happened?" she asked softly. Through chattering teeth and sobs, Ziva told her story about her cruel stepmother, the endless chores, the punishments, and how she had been thrown out into the storm. As Ayanda listened, anger burned in her chest. How could anyone be so heartless? A child was supposed to be loved, protected, not treated like this. She reached out and gently brushed the wet strands of hair from Ziva's face. "You don't have to stay here, sweetheart," she said firmly. "Come with me." Ziva's eyes widened in surprise. You'll help me?" she asked, as if she couldn't believe it. "Of course," Ayanda said with a warm smile. "No child should be left out in the cold." She removed her shawl and wrapped it around Ziva's small shoulders. "Let's get you somewhere warm." For the first time in a long time, Ziva felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. With weak, shaky legs, she stood up, letting Ayanda guide her away from the place that had never truly been home. The rain still fell, and the wind still howled, but for the first time, Ziva didn't feel alone. Someone had finally seen her. Someone had finally cared. Ziva's small frozen hands clung tightly to Ayanda's as they walked through the stormy night. The rain had not stopped, but for the first time, Ziva didn't feel the cold as much. Someone was holding her, guiding her, making sure she was safe. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was this real? Was someone really helping her? After what felt like forever, they finally reached Ayanda's home, a tiny but cozy house at the edge of town. The warm glow of a lantern flickered from inside, casting a golden light against the darkness. Ayanda pushed open the wooden door, and a rush of warmth spilled out. The scent of spices and freshly baked bread filled the air, making Ziva's stomach tighten with hunger. "Come in, child," Ayanda said gently, leading Ziva inside. "You're safe now." Ziva hesitated for a moment, standing in the doorway. She wasn't used to this. A home that felt welcoming, a voice that spoke with kindness. But then her soaked body reminded her of the cold, and she stepped inside, her bare feet sinking into the soft rug. Ayanda quickly grabbed a dry towel and wrapped it around her. "Let's get you warm," she said with a smile. She knelt down and helped Ziva remove her wet dress, replacing it with a thick, soft blanket. Ziva's teeth still chattered, but for the first time that night, warmth began to return to her body. "Sit here," Ayanda said, guiding her to a small wooden table near the fire. Then, she disappeared into the kitchen. Moments later, she returned with a bowl of steaming soup and a slice of warm bread. Ziva stared at the food in disbelief. No one had ever served her before. She was always the one cooking, the one watching others eat while she remained hungry. Tears welled up in her eyes as she picked up the spoon with shaky hands. "Eat, little one," Ayanda encouraged. The first sip of soup sent warmth spreading through Ziva's entire body. It wasn't just the heat of the food. It was the feeling of being cared for, of being seen. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, as if she were afraid this was just a dream that would disappear. After finishing her meal, Ayanda led her to a small bed in the corner of the room. The mattress was soft, the blanket thick and warm. Ziva crawled in, her body exhausted, but her heart full. She had spent so many nights sleeping on the cold, hard floor of her stepmother's house, shivering and afraid. But tonight was different. As Ayanda tucked the blanket around her, she whispered, "You're safe here, Ziva. Sleep well." For the first time in years, Ziva closed her eyes without fear. The storm still raged outside, But inside this home, she felt something she had long forgotten: peace. Days passed, and for the first time in her life, Ziva felt what it was like to be safe. Ayanda's home was small, but it was filled with warmth, kindness, and the smell of home-cooked meals. She had clothes to wear, a bed to sleep in, and a voice that spoke to her with love instead of anger. But even with all of this, a hole remained in her heart: her father. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Was he really too sick to move? Did he even know what Niafa had done to her? Or had Niafa told him lies? The thoughts wouldn't leave her mind. She had to see him, to make sure he was okay. One morning, with determination in her heart, Ziva set out toward her father's house. The path was familiar, but this time it felt different. The house that had once been her home now looked like a place of shadows. She hesitated for a moment, before stepping forward and knocking on the door. The door swung open violently, and Niafa's cold eyes glared down at her. "What are you doing here?" she spat, her voice full of anger. "I want to see my father," Ziva said, trying to keep her voice strong even though her heart pounded. Niafa crossed her arms and smirked. "He doesn't want to see you." Ziva's breath caught in her throat. "That's not true," she protested. "He loves me." Niafa laughed, a cruel sound that cut through Ziva like a knife. "Your father is sick, weak. He doesn't need you bothering him. You were nothing but a burden to him, just like you were to me." She stepped forward, towering over the small girl. "Go away, Ziva. You are not welcome here." Tears burned in Ziva's eyes, but she refused to cry. She glanced past Niafa, trying to catch a glimpse of her father inside, but she saw nothing. "Please," she begged, "just let me see him for one moment." Niafa's face darkened with fury. "I said leave," she hissed, shoving Ziva backward. Ziva stumbled, but caught herself before falling. Her heart ached, but she didn't run away. She stood there, staring at the door that had been slammed in her face. Maybe Niafa could chase her away, but she would never stop trying. Deep inside, she knew the truth. Her father would never reject her. Something wasn't right, and no matter what it took, she would find a way to see him. Ziva returned to Ayanda's home with tears in her eyes, but in her heart, she carried something stronger than sadness: determination. Niafa had lied. Ziva could feel it. Her father would never turn her away. Something was wrong, and she had to find out what. Ayanda saw the pain in Ziva's eyes the moment she walked in. She sat her down, wiped her tears, and listened carefully as Ziva told her everything. Ayanda's face grew serious. A deep frown settled between her brows. "Something is not right," she said firmly. "If your father is really sick, why hasn't anyone called a doctor?" The question made Ziva's stomach twist. She had never thought of that. If her father was ill, Niafa should have been taking care of him. Instead, she was hiding him away, refusing to let anyone see him, including his own daughter. That night, while Ziva rested, Ayanda decided to take matters into her own hands. The next morning, she visited neighbors, asking if anyone had seen Seppo lately. Some shook their heads, saying they hadn't seen him in weeks. Others whispered that they had heard coughing from inside the house but had never been invited in. The more Ayanda asked, the clearer the truth became. Seppo was sick, and Niafa was doing nothing to help him. Determined, Ayanda marched to the house and knocked on the door. She didn't flinch when Niafa opened it. Her face twisted with irritation. "What do you want?" Niafa snapped. Ayanda crossed her arms and met her glare without fear. "I want to see Seppo." Niafa let out a short, sharp laugh. "That's none of your business." "It is my business when a sick man is being hidden away without help," Ayanda shot back. "Why hasn't he been taken to a doctor? Why hasn't the community been told?" Niafa's eyes darkened. "Stay out of this, Ayanda." Her voice was low and threatening. "You don't know what you're talking about." Ayanda stepped forward. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," she said, her voice unwavering. "And if you don't let me see him, I will make sure the whole town knows what you're doing." For a moment, Niafa's face twisted with rage, her hands curling into fists. "You don't scare me," she hissed. "If you keep interfering, you will regret it." But Ayanda didn't back down. She knew she was getting close to the truth. Seppo was in danger, and she wouldn't stop until she exposed what Niafa had done. As Niafa slammed the door in her face, Ayanda made a silent promise to Ziva. She would not let this cruel woman win. She would fight for Seppo, and she would make sure Ziva got her father back. Ayanda did not stay silent. She knew that the only way to help Ziva and her father was to let everyone know what was happening. The very next morning, she went to the town's marketplace, where women gathered to sell vegetables, men exchanged news, and children played in the dusty streets. She spoke to everyone she could, telling them what she had discovered, that Seppo was sick, hidden away, and that Nyafa was refusing him medical care. At first, people were shocked. Seppo was once a strong and hard-working man, respected by many. How could his wife neglect him like this? Some shook their heads in disbelief, but others began whispering among themselves. The whispers grew louder, spreading from home to home. The more people heard, the angrier they became. "I haven't seen Seppo in weeks," one man exclaimed. "I heard coughing from the house, but Nyafa told me he was resting," an old woman added. "She never lets anyone inside," another neighbor said. Now we know why. Soon the rumors reached the ears of the village elders, the respected leaders who settled disputes and ensured justice was served. They gathered in the town square, their faces stern as they discussed the troubling news. Allowing a man to suffer in silence, refusing him care, this was not just cruel, it was unforgivable. By the afternoon, a group of elders, along with several concerned neighbors, marched toward Seppo's house. Their voices were firm as they called for Nyafa to come outside. When she finally opened the door, her face twisted in anger as she saw the crowd standing before her. "What do you all want?" she snapped. One of the elders, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward. "We want to see Seppo," he said firmly. "We have heard the rumors, and we will not leave until we know the truth." Nyafa's eyes darted around, searching for a way out, but she knew she was trapped. The whole town was watching. The elders, the neighbors, the friends Seppo had once called family. All of them stood united. Realizing she had lost control, Nyafa let out an angry sigh and stepped aside. "Fine," she muttered. "See for yourselves." The crowd entered the house, their eyes scanning the dimly lit room. And there, lying weakly on a thin mattress, was Seppo. His face was pale, his body frail. He looked nothing like the strong man they once knew. His breathing was shallow, and his eyes, when they fluttered open, were filled with pain. Gasps filled the room. Women covered their mouths in shock. Some whispered prayers. Ayanda rushed to his side, gently touching his forehead. "He has a fever," she said urgently. "He needs a doctor immediately." The elders turned to Nyafa, their faces filled with disappointment and anger. "How could you let this happen?" one of them demanded. Nyafa's face turned red, but she had no answer. She had been caught. The town had learned the truth, and now justice had to be served. As soon as the elders exposed the truth, Ayanda wasted no time. She hurried back to her home, where Ziva sat anxiously, her fingers twisting together in nervous anticipation. The moment Ayanda stepped inside, Ziva jumped to her feet. "Did you see him? Is he okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ayanda knelt down and held Ziva's hands. "Your father is very weak, but he's alive," she said gently. "And now, nothing will keep you from him." Tears filled Ziva's eyes, but this time, they weren't just from pain, they were from hope. Ayanda took her hand, and together they hurried toward her father's house. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden glow over the dusty road, as if the sky itself was preparing for a moment that would change Ziva's life forever. When they arrived, the house was surrounded by neighbors, whispering about what had happened. The elders stood nearby, watching Nyafa with cold, disapproving eyes. But Ziva didn't care about any of that. Her only focus was on the door that led to her father. One of the elders stepped forward and opened it for her. "Go in, child," he said kindly. Ziva hesitated for only a moment before running inside. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw him. Seppo lay on a thin mattress, his body frail, his face tired. He looked nothing like the strong father she remembered, the one who had carried her on his shoulders and told her bedtime stories when she was little. But the moment he opened his eyes and saw her standing there, everything else faded away. "Ziva," he whispered, his voice weak but filled with disbelief. A sob escaped from Ziva's lips as she ran to him. She fell to her knees beside his bed and grabbed his trembling hands. "Papa, it's me," she cried. Seppo's eyes filled with tears. "My child, my beautiful child," he choked out. His fingers brushed her face as if making sure she was real. I thought you left me." Ziva shook her head fiercely. "No, Papa, I never left. Niafa threw me out. She lied to you." Seppo's face twisted in pain, not from his sickness, but from the truth settling in his heart. He turned his head slowly toward the doorway, where Niafa stood, her arms crossed tightly, her face pale. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice filled with betrayal. Niafa looked away, saying nothing. The silence was answer enough. Seppo's chest rose and fell with deep, shaky breaths. He had been blind for too long, too weak to protect the one person who loved him unconditionally. A tear slipped down his cheek. "I am so sorry, my little one," he whispered, squeezing Ziva's hand. "I failed you." Ziva shook her head, her tears mixing with his. "No, Papa, you didn't fail me. We're together now. That's all that matters." Seppo looked up at Ayanda, who stood quietly in the corner. "You saved my daughter," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "And you saved me." Ayanda smiled softly. "Family should never be torn apart," she said. "Now it's time for you to heal." Ziva rested her head against her father's chest, listening to the weak but steady beat of his heart. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She was home. The town was no longer silent. News of Niafa's cruelty had spread to every corner, and people gathered outside Seppo's home, their faces filled with anger and disbelief. Mothers held their children close, shaking their heads in disgust. Fathers stood with their arms crossed, their jaws tight. How could a woman be so cruel? How could she throw a child into the cold and let her own husband suffer? The community elders arrived, their long robes flowing as they stepped forward. These were the men and women who upheld justice, who made sure no one in their town was left to suffer. Niafa stood stiffly in the doorway, trying to keep her face calm, but her fingers gripped her shawl tightly. She knew she was losing control. One elder, a man named Babaluthando, cleared his throat. His deep voice carried over the crowd. "Niafa," he said, his eyes piercing into hers, "we have heard the truth. You have mistreated Ziva, a child who should have been loved and protected. You have abandoned your husband, refusing him the care he needed. You have brought shame upon yourself and upon this home." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some people shook their heads. Others glared at Niafa, their faces full of disgust. Another elder, Mamathandi, stepped forward. "A home is not just walls and a roof," she said firmly. "A home is built with kindness, love and respect. You have poisoned this home with your cruelty, and for that, you are no longer welcome here." Niafa's eyes widened. "You can't do this," she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. "This is my house too." Mamathandi's expression did not change. "No," she said calmly. "This house belongs to a man who has suffered long enough. This home belongs to a child who deserves peace. You have lost your right to stay here." A voice from the crowd shouted, "She let Seppo suffer." Another added, "She threw a little girl out into the storm." The voices grew louder, filled with outrage. People pointed, whispering, shaking their heads. Niafa turned in circles, looking for someone, anyone, who would take her side, but she saw only cold stares. The people she had once called friends now looked at her as if she were a stranger. Realizing she had no choice, she let out an angry hiss and stormed back inside. The crowd waited as she hurriedly packed a small bag, her movements sharp and furious. When she finally stepped out, her face was twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," she spat at them. "All of you." But no one responded. No one cared. She turned sharply on her heel and walked away, her figure disappearing down the dusty road. The town watched in silence, the only sound being the wind rustling through the trees. For the first time in a long time, the air around Seppo's house felt lighter, as if the darkness had finally lifted, but there was still more to do. Ayanda turned to the elders. "Seppo is too sick to stay here. He needs a doctor," she said urgently. One of the men nodded. "We will take him to the hospital immediately." The crowd sprang into action. A wooden cart was brought forward, lined with soft blankets. Strong hands lifted Seppo gently, placing him on the cart with care. His breathing was weak, but his eyes were open, watching everything. He reached for Ziva's hand, his fingers trembling. "My child," he whispered, "you are safe now." Ziva squeezed his hand tightly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I won't leave you, Papa," she promised. As the cart rolled away, people stepped aside, watching with quiet respect. Women wiped their eyes. Children whispered to one another, sensing the importance of what they had just witnessed. Justice had been served. The wicked stepmother was gone, and now a father and daughter had been given a second chance. For the first time in a long time, Ziva woke up feeling safe. No longer did she have to fear Nyafa's cruel voice or wake up before dawn to clean the house. She was in Ayanda's warm little home, wrapped in a soft blanket, smelling the sweet scent of porridge cooking on the stove. Ayanda smiled as she placed a steaming bowl in front of her. "Eat up, my girl," she said kindly. "You have a big day ahead." Ziva's heart fluttered with excitement. Today she was going back to school. It had been so long since she last sat in a classroom, holding a pencil, writing in a notebook. Nyafa had forced her to drop out, saying that a girl like her was only useful for housework. But now, everything was changing. Dressed in a clean school uniform, one that Ayanda had lovingly bought for her, Ziva stood in front of the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Her hair was neatly braided, her shoes were polished, and for the first time, her eyes shone with happiness. "You look beautiful," Ayanda said, squeezing her shoulders. "Are you ready?" Ziva nodded eagerly. As they walked to the school, children ran past, laughing and playing. Some of them turned and stared at her, whispering to one another. They had heard her story. They knew what she had been through, but instead of pity, Ziva saw something different in their eyes. Admiration. The teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Mbeki, welcomed her with open arms. "Ziva, we are so happy to have you back," she said warmly. "Your seat has always been waiting for you." As she sat at her desk, opening a fresh notebook, a deep sense of joy filled her heart. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Meanwhile, her father, Tsepo, was recovering at the hospital. Day by day he grew stronger, his body healing with the care he had long been denied. When he was finally well enough, he came to see Ziva after school, his eyes shining with love and pride. "My little girl," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I will never let anyone hurt you again." Ziva clung to him, feeling the strength in his embrace. For the first time in years, she truly believed those words. Her past had been painful, but now she had a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Ziva sat outside Ayanda's home. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the world felt peaceful in a way she had never known before. She closed her eyes, folding her hands together. This time, she did not pray for the pain to stop. She did not beg for an escape. Instead, she whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, God," she murmured, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you for keeping me safe. Thank you for sending Ayanda. Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists in the world." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of faith that had never truly left her heart. She thought about everything she had been through, the cold nights, the cruel words, the hunger, the loneliness. At times, it had felt like the darkness would swallow her whole, but even in the worst moments, she had held on to hope, and in the end, her faith had led her to people who cared. She looked at Ayanda, who was smiling warmly as she watched over her. She thought of her father, recovering in the hospital, growing stronger every day. She thought of the kind neighbors who had stood up for her, of her new classmates who welcomed her with open hearts. Ziva had once believed she was alone, but now she knew the truth. She was never alone. Faith and kindness had been her light in the darkness. With a deep breath, she wiped her tears and smiled up at the stars. No matter what the future held, she would face it with courage, knowing that love, kindness, and faith would always guide her way.